Welcome to Tenacity with Sonia C., the podcast where we dive into stories behind success, uncovering lessons learned and the insights gained by leaders and innovators in the business world. I'm your host, Sonia, and let's get started. Today's guest joining me is Kieran James. Kieran is a pioneer in the fintech sector who has harnessed the technology to empower charities. He founded the wonderful organization, a completely free fundraising platform, which he set up in 2016 when training for the New York Marathon to raise money for Mind, a mental health charity in the UK. He wanted to ensure every penny of donors' hard earned money reached the charity, passionate about transparency and trust in online giving. Join me as we uncover the motivations and innovations behind his groundbreaking work with the wonderful organization. Let's get started. Welcome, Kieran. I'm excited to have you on the show today. It's nice for you to be with us.
Thanks ever so much, Sonia. My pleasure.
I'm excited for our conversation. It's quite unique. So let's just dig in.
Absolutely. Far
Do
away.
you want to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been involved in a number of startups over the last 30 years now, so it's quite some time. Prior to that, I was a high school teacher, ran a training institute in the Middle East, and that was after running the training institute, that's when I got into my first business. So I came back from the Middle East to the UK. That was about 1998, and my very first venture was a web design business. I guess in 1998, me and the rest of the world probably trying to get into that space, but there we go.
That was big back then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I started then with a bank loan for an Apple Mac computer. That was how I got started. And the bank was very kind to me because they gave me a loan on the basis of an idea and not a great deal else really. I suppose everyone was reading about the internet and thinking, yeah, this is going to be the next big thing. So that's how I got started.
Very nice. So you run a fintech company in the charity space
Yeah.
with open banking, which we're going to get into. But for those of us or our audience who doesn't know anything or has never heard of the expression open banking, can you tell us a little bit about what is open banking?
Absolutely. Again, let me put that into some context of how we got into it because it's kind of interesting, I guess. It was a requirement rather than anything else. We had to solve a particular problem that we had in that charity space you describe. So jumping forward from 98 to when would it have been 2016? At that point, I was running a telecoms business around IP telephony. So again, all kind of zeros and ones that we were dealing in. And I thought it would be a great idea to start an online charity giving platform that was completely free. So it was a 100% philanthropic project, kind of a side project, a pet project, if you like, while we were running the telecoms business. And that proved to be, after initial cynicism and probably skepticism for the charities about what our motivation was, it proved to be a great success. And we ran into what I would describe as a success paradox, which was that the more charities use the platform, the more donors donated through the platform, the more our costs of operating that platform grew. And the interesting thing about the costs were it was predominantly, I'm going to say, certainly north of 90%, probably north of 95%, the cost of processing payments. So all the donations that were being made through the charity platform were via debit and credit cards. We were funded through corporate sponsors. And basically what happened was that we were going back to the corporate sponsors all the time saying, can we have some more money because we need to pay our payment processing fees. So it was born out of necessity that we had to find a solution to that problem. And we looked long and hard and thought, well, how can people get money to the charities other than through debit and credit card? And that would have been around 2019. So open banking was starting to make a bit of a play and gain a bit of traction, but still fairly early days. And it's still, in many ways, is fairly early days for open banking. What is it? It's a means of moving money from a customer's account to a retailer's or from a donor's account to a charity's without the need for a card in the middle of that process. So it's completely secure. It removes a lot of friction from that process. Very importantly for the charity sector and again, small businesses, it's instant settlement. So the moment I approve a payment as a consumer, it's in the retailer's bank account, which is really, really nice. And I guess the most significant thing is it's kind of 95% cheaper than processing a card payment. So it's a very exciting time to be in open banking. I think it's still a fairly nascent technology, but it's one we're going to see explode.
So I want to donate to a charity.
Yeah.
How do I do that with open banking?
Okay, so it's the way that would work practically. If you were to visit our website, you would choose the charity you wanted to donate to, or you'd be supporting. Typically, what we find is it's people that are running marathons or jumping out of aeroplanes or having the head shaved for charity, whatever it might be. So you might be supporting a friend or a colleague. You'd click on their donate button on their website. If you were doing that on a laptop, what would happen then that might be different from a card payment is you'd be presented with a QR code. You'd hold your mobile phone up to the QR code, scan the QR code. You'd then be asked to choose your mobile bank, so your mobile bank account, whoever you banked with. You select your bank, and then basically from there, everything is completely automated, and you're in that very familiar environment of your mobile banking app.
Mm,
So I don't know whether you're seeing this in Canada or in the States. I guess it's the same kind of thing as well, where if you make an online payment for something and it's north of a certain value, you very often ask for additional security. It's called strong customer authentication. That might
mm,
be that the card issuer or the bank sends you a one-time password and you've got to enter that to complete the payment. Very frequently, though, you'll actually end up in your mobile bank and approve that payment. And that's basically what open banking does. It skips all the card detail data entry and the potential compromise of that data, takes you straight to your mobile bank, and all you'll do then is authorize that payment. So it's all pre-populated. There's no checking numbers. There's no sort codes, as we call them here in the UK. There's no data entry at all. That's all pre-approved. You're just saying, yes, I want to pay, in the UK case, it might be I want to pay £25 to cancer research. That's all in your bank ready, and you just go tap and approve. So really, really straightforward. If you're on a mobile device, even easier because there's no QR code. Essentially, you'll be on the device. It will say, make the donation. You'll tap and just open your mobile bank account and approve the payment.
so why isn't this bigger?
It's a case of, well, there are a couple of answers to that. One of them may sound, I used the word cynical before, I may sound a little cynical in this. There's kind of a lot of interest in it not being as successful or rapidly adopted as it might be, because clearly there's a lot of people making quite a lot of money out of processing transactions using cards, from
Right.
the card issuers down to the gateways, down to even things like e-commerce stores where there'll be relationships with card processors that benefit the store owners as well. So right the way through that whole model, there are a lot of intermediaries taking effectively a slice of the pie.
Hmm.
And what's really accelerated the growth, certainly in the UK, EU, Canada as well to an extent, is the CMA9, it's called. So the Competition and Markets Authority's 9 big banks were mandated to open up their APIs for fintechs like us to make those connections securely. So we have to be authorized. Clearly, it's not just anyone that can go in and start talking to the bank's APIs. So we're an authorized payment institution. And I think that mandating in probably 2016, 17, I hope I've got my dates right, is what's really forced some movement in this space. So you will see more and more adoption.
Okay, that's really cool. I mean, why? Okay, let's talk about the security part of it. I mean, that's the thing that, like, when you said it goes to your mobile. Okay, so how secure is this? And how do you market that to companies that want to start using the system to know that, hey, first, this is a better way of doing it, and it is secure, just like you would do with any credit card processing.
Well, in many ways, it's more secure than a card payment. And let me again give you a couple of analogies as to why it might be. You know, everyone's using contactless payment at the moment, and there's been a massive adoption of contactless, particularly during the pandemic when no one wants to touch anything, and obviously contactless works really well in that scenario. That I think also has its downsides in the sense that if I lose my wallet or my wallet's stolen within a couple of hours of having my debit card before it gets blocked, I could wander around London and do quite a lot of damage. With an open banking payment, you can't do that because you need that biometric security. When you open your bank account, it might be Face ID or a fingerprint or something like that in order to actually approve the payment. So your security element, there's one there. The other is that you'll read about companies where cards have been compromised and they have to be blocked. If you look at the whole process around cards and what we've seen over the last 10 years, I would describe this as more and more bolts being added to the door because essentially the payment process is not really designed and never was. Remember, these were introduced decades ago for a very, very different world. So things like putting a CVV number on the back of a card was an additional layer of security, and it's on the reverse so
Yeah.
that it's not on the front. Then you've had one-time passwords. Now you're seeing things like disposable cards. So I only use this card number for one transaction. All of that for me feels like, I've closed the door. Now I need to add a bolt. Now I need to add another bolt. Now I'm going to put a chain on it. The way open banking works, it's a tokenized payment. So once you've consented, and remember, you're going to consent to this payment as a consumer, you can see who you're going to pay, you can see the amount you're going to pay. That's in your mobile banking app already. All you're going to do is go, I know this is going to Cancer Research UK. I know it's £25. I'll approve that payment.
Mhm.
Because it's tokenized as well, what we're seeing as the fintech sitting in the middle of that is a token that's set for, in our case, it might be 3 or 4 minutes. Once it's been issued, that payment can't be revoked, it can't be changed, you can't change who it's going to, you can't change the amount. That's it, it's set.
Mm.
So it's super secure in that sense. And then the final point is if I'm not entering those card details anywhere, there's nowhere for them to be stolen or lost. So again, you're removing that part.
Yeah, that's a good point. So for if I want to donate, $20 to cancer research, how much of my money traditionally, on average, does the charity actually get versus because I'm assuming that the fees are all removed from that donation, correct?
Yeah. This was why we got started back in 2016. I like many people, I run for charity for many, many years, and it was my 50th. I was doing another run during that year. And I just kind of was getting a bit fed up of the fact that when I was talking to my kids, who were then talking to their friends at school, so these are people who don't have a huge amount of money to donate. They may be earning it on a paper round or
Yeah.
a job in the shop. And you just think, I don't really want part of that £5 that they're donating being lost to the charity. We all want it to go to the cause that we're paying. So that was a motivation. What was happening around then? There were a number of things. So typically the fundraising platforms were not always, but often for-profit businesses. So they have a different audience to satisfy and cater for. So there were fees and charges that they were making. And then on top of that, which I always found very odd, they would separate out the card processing fees and charge those at a different amount. Now, again, I could never in my own head really rationalize that because if I go to the supermarket and make a purchase, it's not £60. And by the way, we're going to add on 2.5% for the card processing fees. It's just absorbed by the supermarket. So that always felt odd. We then had in the UK, well, we still have a scheme called Gift Aid, which is kind of a tax incentive, and deductions were being made from that to cover the costs of operating the platform that you were making donations for as well. So it seemed like everywhere there were leakages coming out of that donation. So our model was based on we want it to be 100%, no deductions. We won't charge for payment processing. And that again goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning about we had to bring in a corporate sponsor to fund that payment. All the rest of the operation we were funding ourselves entirely. So there were literally, as no one takes a salary out of wonderful.org. It is completely free, always will be for charity, so we'll never charge them. To answer your question, it's a hard one. But I would say certainly back then it would have been 5% platform fees plus another 2.5% for card processing. Some of that taken from Gift Aid initially, if Gift Aid was added to the donation. But yeah, it felt like a sizable chunk.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being 7 to 8, sometimes maybe even 10% of the donation, right?
Yeah.
So what does the charity actually get? They sort of get the leftovers.
That's it. And remember, then once that donation's been received, they still have their operating costs that they have to bear before it's reaching the end cause, the thing that you want to support as a donor. So, the more we can get to
Yeah,
them in the first instance, the more that's reaching that end cause.
exactly. I mean, I hope that like more charities or people that are thinking about starting up charities get to listen to this and consider, open banking as an option to do this, especially because you mentioned that it's available in the UK and Canada. I'm assuming that compliance goes along with that in these two countries.
Yes, yeah, 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 and many others. So the EU is very, very advanced. Australia as well. Australia probably potentially more than anywhere. So they've moved from open banking into open finance and now open data. They're really, really kind of blazing a trail.
Mm.
So yeah, many countries, and the US will happen soon. I think. Again, forgive me if I'm wrong on my dates, but I'm pretty sure that sometime during 2024, the first banks are going to be mandated to open up their APIs in the same way. So you're going to see some fairly rapid progress in the US as well.
So the wonderful organization has grown to support around 1,000 charities through open banking. What challenges did you encounter along the way, and how did you overcome them to achieve this level of success?
It was very interesting at the outset because there was a naivety that I look back on with 2020 hindsight, and you go, yeah, I can see why that was a problem. But we really thought we would just email all the big charities, and because it was free, they'd go, yeah, where do we sign? And it really wasn't like that. It really wasn't. I think a lot of the charities were genuinely concerned about our motivation, which surfaced in comments like, we're worried you might be hijacking our brand, which I always thought was a little odd. Um, to just general concerns about whether we were going to sell data, whatever it might be, that there was some strange motivation. It was one of those things where, looking at the work that charities, donors, and fundraisers were doing, it was an aspirational thing. We thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a platform that sat in the middle of those three groups of people that was as wonderful as they are, hence the name. Um, so that was the initial challenge. It took us 18 months to get 100 charities on board, and we thought it would take us a few
Wow.
days. We then had that moment that I guess every business or anyone supporting the charity sector would love, which is, in the UK, we call it the money saving expert moment. So there's a website in the UK called the Money Saving Expert. I think in terms of web traffic, it's top 100. And they came along and said, wonderful organization, is fantastic. 100% of your
Oh,
donation goes to the charity. And we went from 100 charities in 18 months to actually registering 100 in one day once that. So the
wow.
doors, yeah, the floodgates just went. Um,
I mean, that's a significant number.
it was crazy. So again, so to give you a little context, because you go, okay, you did 100 a day. How come you're on the 1,000 now? What happened was, at that point, we were still processing donations using cards. When COVID happened, because this was a completely philanthropic operation and we were running a telecoms business, a big part of the telecoms business was telephone conferencing. We were supporting quite a few NHS trusts in the UK, so the National Health Service, and something had to give. So we said, well, look, let's pause the platform. We've also got this problem we've got to solve of the cost of processing payments. So we'll reopen, having thought that through. So actually, when we reopened, we couldn't just register. We had multiple thousands on at that point, but we couldn't just re-register them because they all had to go through the diligence of being an open banking recipient rather than just a recipient of a card payment. So basically, we were at ground zero again in terms of re-registering all the charities. So that's why we're back up to 1,000 now. We also,
Mm.
because it's wonderful.org and we've reduced those costs so much, there is no card donation option. So charities can only use open banking through our platform, which I wouldn't
Wow.
advocate for a commercial organization. For a commercial organization, I'd say keep your existing payment methods in place and introduce this one. But we were forced to do that.
An add-on.
Exactly, yeah, and we've seen that. We've seen that quite a lot with commercial organizations. So it's not a this or that solution. It's a this and that. But what typically happens is the retailer will promote it quite strongly because of the cost savings. It makes a lot of sense for them to put it number one on the list of checkout options to pay. But we'd always say to anyone, the more routes you can give people to completing that purchase, absolutely, without overfacing them. It's like a restaurant menu. You don't want so much that you don't know what to choose, but at the same time, give people options.
So I feel like you sort of went through a pivot point in your company,
Yep.
right? When you sort of had to restart. Can you just walk our listeners through, obviously you get to a pivot because you go through some sort of failure. And I love talking about failures because I feel like not enough founders and organizations talk about all the failures they've gone through before they become successful. And I really believe that failures can lead you to success because it gives you an opportunity to bang your head on the wall, learn from that, and grow, right? So can you walk us through your failure and your pivot and how it led you to sort of rethink how to pivot properly?
It was fabulous. In fact, funnily enough, I was chatting to my son, who also has his own business, on this very theme of failure, and he finished my sentence for me. I thought it was brilliant, actually. So I'm going to share his finishing of my sentence with you and your listeners. I was saying,
Okay.
you're often asked about failure, and my view is there's no such thing as failure. It's always lessons learned. And he said, unless you don't learn the lessons, and then you're definitely failing. And I thought that's absolutely the case. So if you've seen something not work once, you've tried to fix it and that didn't work, then you're not learning your lessons. In terms of our experience, though, what was very interesting was we recognized, I think, quite late that we created this success paradox. A couple of people kind of mentioned it to us and said the problem you're going to have is, those costs every month are going to increase. You're going to have to go back to corporate sponsors, and you will be on an ever increasing conversation path with bigger and bigger corporate sponsors as you grow because they're going to need deeper pockets. And we went, oh, it'll be all right. Everyone's going to love this. If it grows, it's a great message to get behind. And the reality is, bringing corporate sponsors on for anything is really hard work.
Yeah.
So we were obliged to solve that problem. And we did find that solution in open banking. The beauty of solving that problem for the charities was that light bulb moment when you think, well, actually, this problem exists in the commercial space. It's exactly the same. The cost of moving money shouldn't be prohibitive. And chatting to a retailer recently, they were saying, when it got to the point when 10% of our net profits is just going on getting paid, something's got to be done. And I think that's really, really significant. So for us, rather than it being just a lesson learned, it was actually it wasn't just a pivot even, it was let's sell the telecoms business and move the entire team into this new business, get ourselves authorized and launch a commercial service because there's a huge opportunity here. So I guess it's,
Mm,
out of out of pain points can come really, really serendipitous moments.
yeah. So that sort of leads me to my next question. How do you see this technology continuing to disrupt the payment industry, especially for small businesses?
I think it's huge. And just this weekend, we've had another monumental announcement. So if you think about the payment flow I described before, so I'm in a retail outlet, for example. If I've got to scan a QR code to make a payment, that's clearly, there's more friction at that point than there would be in doing a contactless payment. So we often say to
Mm,
brick and mortar retailers, unless you've got a high transaction value and a reasonably, not massive throughput, so you wouldn't want to use this in a coffee shop when you're buying a cup of coffee. It's just too slow in that sense currently. But if you're processing a payment for, say, a used car, or you're processing a payment for a bit of antique furniture, you're standing with the retailer for a little bit longer, then it's not a problem. The
right.
e-commerce scenario is clearly it's faster, so you're going to get through checkout in e-commerce much quicker than you would in a retail environment. However, what we've seen announced this week is Apple announcing that the wallet is going to be opened up for third-party providers like fintechs such as ourselves. Now, that is huge because it means you can actually use wallet without linking that to a card. So if you could link that to a
Mm,
fintech business like Wonderful, it means you can make that payment directly by doing that contactless thing. And for us, that's really, really huge. I think even before that, this is a massively disruptive technology. Our analogies would be, it's as big as Spotify has been in the music industry, or Uber has been in hailing rides. It's just massive. Um, Also, though,
yeah.
there's a lot of vested interest in this not being adopted as quickly as we'd like to see it adopted. So, there are challenges there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, banking in general, it's such I call it a traditional industry. It's always been done a certain way and it's got that mentality, if it's not broken, don't fix it. The people who need to be making money are making money. Great. But fintech is sort of new. It hasn't been around for that long, and it's really taken off in the last couple years, I feel. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity for fintech companies once things open up even further to keep innovating, right? And coming up with better solutions within the fintech space. How do you feel about that?
Completely agree. We have two sets of permissions from the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. So we're a payment initiation service provider, and we're also an account information service provider. And the reason I mention both of those things is that we've only recently started deploying the account information service permissions that we have, and we're using them to do things like verify bank accounts when our merchants are signing up. But actually those permissions give us scope to do so many things that I'll often say to colleagues, it's almost like there are too many entrances to the gold mine. You don't know which one to choose because the opportunities abound. We have conversations every day, so we're really targeting the small business sector with kind of a mass market proposition of 1,000 transactions a month for £9.99, so a penny a transaction effectively. But what we're finding all the time is that actually these bigger companies with really interesting ideas are approaching us saying, have you thought about this? And we go, actually, that's a really great application of the
Mm.
technology. So, I mean, I think the world is your oyster genuinely in this space in terms of what can be done. And people are coming up with some really innovative ideas. So that CMA 9 mandate that I mentioned at the beginning, that was a whole reason for it, was to try and spur innovation in this sector. And it's worked without a doubt.
Yeah. So let's say I want to start a startup and I want to collect money from my for my services or my products, whatever it may be. How can I work with the wonderful organization? Do you guys license your technology out to other companies? How could I use your technology on my like with my new company or existing company?
We're focused predominantly in the UK right now. That isn't to say we won't be expanding into other countries, but I mentioned it's fairly nascent. We've probably got 5.5 million SMEs in the UK that are our target audience for this. So there's no reason to move instantly into other locations. That will happen for certain. But right now, the way that you would use our service, we've got a number of routes. One is integration through e-commerce platforms. So think WooCommerce on WordPress or
Which
maybe
are massive,
Magento. Sorry.
yeah. Which are e-commerce is massive now.
Absolutely massive. So WordPress, I understand, powers around 50% of websites globally. It is just enormous. So all those kind of, not just micro retailers, I think there are bigger ones, certainly using WooCommerce could immediately, certainly in the UK, plug us in to check out, and we're there, it's available. Um, the other thing we'll do is roll out with as many of those e-commerce platforms as we can, so that we're visible on lots of different locations and different stores. But also through accountancy software too, there are really good integration routes. So imagine you're doing an invoice run. You don't necessarily have an e-commerce website. Maybe you're a law firm, for example, and every month you do an invoice run for all of your clients. We'll have a pay button at the bottom of those invoices, so you can just pay via open banking, again at a much reduced rate, and get that money settled instantly into your account. On top of that, we have our public API. So if you want to use that and do clever stuff directly, so if you've got web developer resource within your business, then again, use the public API and process payments that way. And we'll look at a number of other routes. One of the things that we're keen to do is talk to electronic point of sale providers. So we get regularly, we'll get calls from restaurants or hospitality type places saying this will be fabulous if we can just put it at the end of a bill. But of course, what they also want to do is integrate that with their POS system. So, they're not entering, for example, not that you would do this, but entering all the things that people have ordered and then creating a QR code. That would be nuts and clearly wouldn't work. So again, those conversations are going to be really interesting over the next weeks and months, and getting those integrations done. But for us, it's all about that. It's all about integrating with as many places as possible, just providing the thing that we do, which is payments.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question, what led you to want to be an entrepreneur? It is not an easy task or process or journey.
It was going back to that 1998 scenario. It was actually, again, it was kind of a necessity. I'd been employed, but in the last job that I was in, we ended up not being paid, and had to come back from the Middle East. So that wasn't ideal. And one of the last tasks I think I'd done in that organization was they asked me to put together a PDF marketing document for the Training Institute, which they wanted to operate around the whole of the Middle East. So it was 98, and I thought, well, surely this shouldn't be a PDF. We should do a website. And kind of started toying and looking at HTML and thinking, how might we do this? So there was an interest for sure. And I think I've always had a bit of a, I wouldn't say a creative streak. I definitely don't claim to be a coder. Certainly not these days. It's left me behind many years ago. But it interested me a lot. So I thought, well, there's definitely a burgeoning market here, and it's going to grow fairly rapidly. Can I do something that's fairly straightforward, put together some simple websites and make some money? And I remember, again, you go into that with a huge amount of passion and belief, and then it's quite hard to win the clients. But I remember that moment of getting paid for the first job and just thinking, I've really earned this money. And actually, it's quite a nice payday. That's quite a reasonable amount to get for the work that I've put in. And it just from there,
Yeah.
it's been nonstop. It's this is what I want to do: be my own boss and be the master of my own destiny to an extent.
It's almost kind of like you won the lottery, but yet you did all the work, but it feels like that.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, literally, when we got paid for that first job, which was, it's going to sound crazy when I say we went and bought a car. We bought a used car that had probably got 80,000 miles on the clock and didn't cost a great deal of money, but we paid cash for it. And I've been waiting to get paid for so long. It was quite hard, but to do that and just go, it's just fabulous. It was a really, really great thing. And I think from there, one of the things that is hard about web design, and probably is still the case, as I say, I'm not involved anymore directly, but it was that constant kind of back and forth with the client and them always wanting to move something 3 pixels to the left and 10 pixels to the right. And can you just change the color on that? And the job never
Gosh.
seems to end.
Yeah.
Um, that got me into kind of going, well, I think at the time we were doing domain name registration as part of that client onboarding. So we'd register their domain name. And I remember thinking, this is so much less hassle, this whole idea of just
Yeah.
registering the domain. So we ended up, again, the guy that I work with now is now my CFO in this business. We've worked together for all of those 25, 30 years. But he bought the web design business that I was operating and said, come and join my domain name registration business. And, we moved from there into company formations online, then telephony, and now payments. It's always been zeros and ones. I think for me, it's much easier.
Nice. So we're getting into our time, and but before we go, I just wanted to ask you, you know, a lot of our listeners are inspiring entrepreneurs or existing entrepreneurs that are looking to scale or learn from people who have been there and done it. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who is trying to figure it out, whether it's growth, pivoting, or starting, what would you tell them?
I think that there's a piece of advice that I share a lot, and I think it's an important one. A lot of people go into business and do something that they are passionate about. So they'll start a business with a theme that they enjoy. Somebody who enjoys doing yoga might become a yoga teacher or maybe sell yoga merchandise or whatever it might be. But there's generally a spark there that comes from that interest. And I think that's a really great thing to have that passion. But I also think that passion can sometimes kind of blind us to the
Mm,
success or not success of that business. So there can be a tendency because you believe it's the next great thing that
yeah.
the rest of the world will believe it's the next great thing. And actually, you've got to look hard at the numbers. And I try and encapsulate that in a phrase that I've shared many times over the years when I've been asked that question, which is be passionate and dispassionate in equal measure. So keep that passion
Mm,
for what you love for the business, but be dispassionate when you're looking at the numbers. And if they're telling you something that you really don't want to believe, then you have to believe it. And that might be, you use the word pivot earlier. Maybe it's a pivot. Maybe actually is this isn't working. Let me try something else.
yeah, I find that with founders, it's really hard for them to get to a point where they're like, this isn't working. I either need to stop or and figure out what I'm going to do next or how to pivot. They sort of like, keep beating a dead horse, that expression,
Yeah.
until they think they're going to bring the horse back to life. And, once it's dead, and very
Yeah.
hard to do that.
It's
And
really
they
hard.
just, like, they struggle to let it go. And the problem is they keep putting money into it,
Exactly,
but
exactly.
it's going nowhere, right?
Yeah. It's a really hard thing because I think because it's born out of that thing that you love, it's really hard to let go.
Yeah.
It's tricky, but I think you have to. But equally, you will see these things. I mean, you see them regularly on LinkedIn. I remember a post that I read a couple of years ago from a guy who we worked with 25 years ago. Has gone on to do amazing things. And it was that typical LinkedIn post of there are just three words that I want to share: never, full stop, give, full stop, up, full stop. And you think, yeah, I know what you're saying. It's right. It's great. You know, tenacity is a wonderful thing, but you have to kind of
Yes.
go, there's a point when I don't need to be tenacious anymore. Move on.
Well, you have to be realistic,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it was so nice to have you today on the show. This was a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure all of our listeners are really going to enjoy it. Thank you so much,
Thank
Kieran.
you,
I
Sonia.
appreciate your insight. I hope to have you on again and we can talk about, the next phases of open banking. I'm sure as soon as this like really takes off, it's going to change that whole industry. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of it.
Thank you again. It's been my pleasure, really.
Thank you. And that's a wrap. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope Kieran's conversation not only enlightened you about the transformative power of open banking, but also inspired you to think about how technology can be a force for good. To our listeners, thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery and inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and join our community on social media. I would love to hear from you. Leave a review and tell me what topics you'd like me to explore in future episodes. Remember, the future belongs to those who embrace change and innovation with tenacity. Keep striving, keep innovating, and most importantly, stay tenacious in your pursuits. Thank you for tuning in. I look forward to bringing you more inspiring conversations in our upcoming episodes. This is Sonia signing off, but as always, remember to chase your dreams with tenacity.